And our top focus at this hour on World DNA. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has urged both Israel and Hamas to finalize a hostage for ceasefire deal at the earliest.
Absolutely. Blinken claimed that 90% of the deal has been agreed upon by both the parties, with just a few issues remaining, including the Philadelphia corridor.
So at this point, it seems to me that it's really incumbent on both parties to get to yes on these remaining issues.
As US continues its efforts for a deal, Hamas accused the Joe Biden-led country for being blindly biased towards Israel. In a video statement, Hamas lead negotiator, Qatar-based Khalil al-Hayya, urged the US to press Israel for a truce in Gaza. He accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of evading a ceasefire in the Palestinian territory.
إن على الإدارة الأمريكية ورئيسها بايدن إن أرادت الوصول فعلا إلى صفقة ووقف لإطلاق النار وإنجاز هذه الصفقة بشكل جدي وفعال، عليها التخلي عن انحيازها الأعمى للاحتلال الصهيوني ودعمها اللامحدود لهذه الحكومة الفاشية وممارسة ضغط حقيقي على نتنياهو وحكومته وإلزامهم بما تم التوافق عليه سابقا.
Meanwhile, a report is doing the rounds that the families of captives with American citizenship are petitioning Biden administration to cut a unilateral deal with Hamas for their release.
Speaking to Channel 12, US-Israeli hostage Sangwe Dekeljan's father said there is no truth to this report. 6 days since the recovery of the bodies of the 6 hostages killed by Hamas, Israel continues to see protests.
Hundreds of protesters took to the streets in Tel Aviv demanding an immediate deal. They set off flares on a road they blocked in the city, calling on the government to do more to bring home the remaining held hostages by Hamas.
Meanwhile, countries continue with their efforts to avoid the war in Gaza from spilling over into the larger West Asian region. Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi, during a press conference with his German counterpart Annalena Baerbock, warned that the region was only a brink away from a catastrophe.
ألمانيا سباقة كانت دائما في الضغط من أجل تطبيق القانون الدولي، تطبيق القانون الدولي الإنساني، ومكانة ألمانيا والقيم الألمانية تفرض على ألمانيا اتخاذ خطوات واضحة فيما يتعلق بفرض عقوبات على الحكومة الإسرائيلية وعلى المسؤولين الإسرائيليين الذين يبثون ثقافة الكراهية ويحرضون على القتل ويبررون قتل الأبرياء ويدفعون المنطقة كلها باتجاه التصعيد.
And for more on this, we have with us Dov Zakim, former Undersecretary of Defense under the George Bush administration, now who is currently the Senior Advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies. Now he's joining us live from Washington. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, how do you assess these charges leveled at Netanyahu? Do you think he's doing this for political gains?
Well, that's what many people say, not just political gain, but to stay in power because he has been subject to indictments. He's actually on trial. And the feeling is that the longer he can prolong this war, the longer he can avoid essentially being prosecuted and convicted. Now, there are two sides to this, to the charges and counter charges that you hear from Netanyahu on the one hand and Hamas on the other. I mean, let's not forget who started all of this. It was the Hamas massacre on October 7th and the seizing of ordinary civilians, older people, babies, that has caused this hostage crisis. But Netanyahu right now has an opportunity essentially to call Hamas's bluff. That's to say, he now does not have a legislature to answer to because they are on recess till virtually the end of October. And as a result, they can't bring his government down. Even the extremists in his government cannot do anything because there won't be a vote of confidence, of no confidence, actually. There's no Knesset to vote it. So were Netanyahu to agree to a deal, then the onus would be on Hamas to say why they don't want this deal. Now, he's holding out for this Philadelphia corridor. It's about 9 miles wide. And the question that people are asking, including his defense minister, I should say, is, well, you know, if it's so important, well, Israel has fought 2 wars with Hamas while Netanyahu was prime minister. Why didn't he ever talk about this before? Clearly, if he makes, if he indicates a willingness to give up this fixation on Philadelphia, which, oh, by the way, they could always seize at any time if they want to, and there are other ways to deal with the problem, then Hamas has to explain why they don't want a ceasefire. Many people believe they don't want it. Netanyahu, many people think, is waiting for Donald Trump to win the next election because then he thinks he'll have a free hand from the United States. Hamas, of course, just the opposite. They don't want Trump in there, but they are holding out because they, too, would like this war to continue. So someone has to essentially call the other side's bluff, and Netanyahu is in a very strong position to do that.
Mr. Zakim, as you mentioned, I'll take 2 points from your response that, Hamas wants this war to continue as well. So you're saying that both sides want the war to continue. And you're also mentioning that the Philadelphia corridor is one that Netanyahu is sticking around with. At this point, there are reports suggesting that 90% of creases have been ironed out for a ceasefire deal. When you talk about the last 10%, Philadelphia corridor is one we've been hearing about. What are the other sticking points, and are they conciliable?
Well, essentially, the problem is where do the Israelis move? Hamas wants them out completely. Netanyahu certainly doesn't want to do that. So there's an issue there. And that one and frankly, the Philadelphia corridor are the 2 big ones. Of course, there are small details. Obviously, how do the Israelis move out? How much of the corridor do they give up? When do they give it up? All of those issues have to be ironed out. And quite honestly, 90% is just not good enough. It has to be 100%. And right now, although Secretary Blinken has essentially performed yeoman's duty flying out so often to the Middle East, he cannot bring the horses to water. He can bring the horses to water, but if they don't want to drink, they won't drink. Someone has to be willing to say, okay, I accept this deal, and tell the other side, are you willing to accept it? Netanyahu is in a position to do that, and his people, so many Israelis, are arguing day and night for the release of the hostages. Hundreds of thousands are demonstrating. The country is bitterly divided. He can do something about that. After all said and done, Israel's a democracy. Hamas is certainly not. And Hamas is quite willing to lose its own people. They don't care. They've announced that. They don't care how many Palestinians are killed. But the Israelis clearly are in a position to essentially put the onus on Hamas. Whether Netanyahu does it or not is a whole other issue.
All right, Mr. Hakim, I'll take your point from the first answer. You mentioned Hamas fearing Trump to come after the elections. How important do you think is it for the U.S. now to secure a ceasefire deal considering the November elections in less than 60 days?
Well, obviously, if there's a ceasefire, Mr. Biden is the leading candidate for a Nobel Peace Prize. And even if he doesn't get it, it's a tremendous legacy and an end to his presidency. It also, of course, will help his vice president, who's running for president. Ms. Harris would, of course, take a lot of credit, or at least be given credit, for being supportive. So it would give them a boost. If there's no ceasefire, if there's no deal, Trump can argue, as he has in fact been arguing, that were he president, this would have all been resolved. But then again, Mr. Trump has also said that were he president, Russia would not have invaded Ukraine. There are many things he says, if only he had been president.
All right, Mr. Davzakim, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate how you break down complicated scenarios in a manner that is easily understandable. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights. That was former Undersecretary of Defense in the George W. Bush administration, Davzakim, joining us.
Thank you very much.